The business model of the last 27 years of the internet is dying. We might be on the cusp of what could be a truly golden age of content creation. What's really changed is actually the consumer behavior. And the reason the consumer behavior has changed is because the models have gotten better. Answer engines are better than search engines. Full stop for consumers. What we need to do is preserve journalism, and we need to preserve knowledge creation, and we need to preserve storytelling. Most humans make decisions on what small businesses they interact with based on either convenience or emotion. Agents don't care about either of those things. I do worry that left to its own devices, agentic commerce is a massive consolidator. Who's going to be the first salesperson who's sitting in a customer meeting and a customer asks for a feature and they build it in the meeting and release it to production while they're sitting there?
Welcome to Disruptor Confessions. I'm your host, John Ayers. Our guest today runs a piece of the internet that a lot of you probably never even think about. And when it works, you don't know it's there. When it breaks, a good portion of the web goes dark. Matthew Prince is the co-founder and CEO of Cloudflare, but he's also one of the sharpest voices on what's actually happening right now. What is AI doing to the open web? I actually heard Matthew speak at the World Economic Forum earlier this year in Davos, and he shared a warning of sorts, and he said something to the effect of big tech has never been more vulnerable than they are today. And he went on to talk about how AI agents are changing things. And in fact, when AI agents start to do the buying for us, that local businesses that hold our communities together, they're actually going to get cut out of the picture completely. And that's the conversation we want to have. So Matthew, with that, welcome to the show.
John, thanks for having me.
Yeah, fantastic. So I guess the first thing, I think of Cloudflare as just this leading, security infrastructure for the internet. I want to get into this whole agentic commerce space, but we pride ourselves on kind of making sense of the conversations for the broader public. So for our audience, for me, how do you describe Cloudflare? Let's just start there.
Yeah, so Cloudflare is rebuilding the internet to make sure that it has everything that it should have had if we knew what we were getting into in the very beginning. It's interesting, if you go back and read the original specifications for the internet that we all use today, this was never supposed to be the thing that carried live video like we're doing now. It was never supposed to be the thing that handled commerce. It was supposed to be sort of a silly, almost toy research project on the side. There was an official kind of secure internet which was being developed at the same time that never really took off. And so instead, this thing that had no real security, had no real reliability built into it, but was incredibly cheap and efficient to run, that's what took off. And so Cloudflare started out by saying, how can we basically make it so that anyone who is putting content online could have security? How can we put a firewall effectively in the cloud? Over time, we've developed an entire developer platform where a huge percentage of the new sites and applications that are being built online are developed through. And because of that, a huge percentage, more than 20% of the web now sits behind Cloudflare. And that gives us sort of a catbird seat, both to understand what's happening and what trends are going on, but then also to help define, what the future is going to look like for the internet as a whole.
And I think you've actually described, and I love this, and maybe it was you, but it's almost like you guys are the bouncer. You decide who gets in the door or not. You're kind of like that blocker. Is that a simple way to think about it?
Yeah, I think that's probably the right description for where we started. I think that it's probably not complete today, but whether it's we're sort of the force shield or we're the bouncer, we help make sure that those sort of rules are followed. But then on top of that, increasingly you can develop whole applications on us, and increasingly we're also thinking about things like, if there's going to be a new business model of the internet, what is that going to look like?
Well, that's actually, I'm probably leading the witness, because I was thinking about your mission, which was, I believe, when you started, build a better internet. That mission still is your mission, right? But it's different.
With an asterisk, I think, which is you left one really critical word out, which is, well, our mission is to help build a better internet. We don't think we can do it alone, and so we try to partner with both civil society organizations, other commercial organizations, people who are standard setters, regulators and governments around the world, because I think this is something that, the internet, when it's at its best, is governed sort of from the bottom up. It's not controlled by any one organization. And so our mission is to help build a better internet. Our new mission is definitely not to build a better internet, because I think that that's a real threat and a real disservice to all the amazing people that have worked to build the internet into what it is today. And I hope we help continue to push that forward, but we can't do it alone.
100%. You have this incredible view from which you sit within Cloudflare and the work that you guys have been doing the last, I guess, 16 years now. When I think about the volume of data, exponential curve of data, there's a lot of us that aren't seeing what you're seeing. Can you just, without getting too detailed, just tell us broadly what you're seeing, not the last 16 years, but really, Matthew, like the last 3 years, what are you seeing in terms of like the biggest change in data that the rest of us aren't even aware of? Maybe start there.
Yeah, so the first thing is when we started Cloudflare, and for most of the internet's history, there's always been automated traffic. So Google has crawled the internet in order to build their search index. There's been automated malicious traffic that's been out there, but it's sort of hovered around 20% of the total traffic that has been online. I was asked last year, actually at Web Summit, so in late 2025, November of 2025, when did I think that automated traffic, agentic traffic, would cross human traffic online? And we pulled all the data in order to sort of give a good estimate for that. And at the time, it looked like it was going to be in the second half of 2027. At South by Southwest, just a few months later in March of 2026, I was asked the same question again. When we went back and revisited the data, I expected that the answer would be the same, but it actually moved up quite a bit, which was now agentic traffic, automated traffic was going to pass human traffic in the first half of 2027. And so I was really surprised when in May of this year, the team came to me and said, "You won't believe it, but now that automated traffic is 57% of traffic online. It's already past human traffic, which is now only 43%. And if those trends continue, in 5 years, we anticipate that automated traffic, that agentic traffic, will be 1,000 times more traffic than humans online. Not because humans are going to stop using the internet. We think human traffic will hold pretty steady over that period of time. But you're just going to see just this explosion in traffic, which is generated by these agentic systems. And we can all see that. If you've ever used ChatGPT, if you've ever used Grok, if you've ever used Claude, and you ask it a question, if I ask, like, I'm shopping for a digital camera, if I'm doing that personally as a human, I have a finite amount of time, I have a finite amount of patience. I might visit 5 websites and, visit, 10 pages per website. Your agent's going to visit literally 1,000 times that much and see just more because it has almost infinite patience and almost infinite time to be able to do that. And so that alone is going to drive just an enormous amount. That's having consequences as well, because these agentic systems are getting significantly smarter. If you think about like search in the past, when you search for something, Google return 10 blue links. The search wasn't over when they got the links. That was just the treasure map. And then it was your job as the human to click on the different links and then go find what it was you were actually looking for. Search engines are changing from being search engines to now being answer engines. So if you've run a Google search recently, the results that you get back at the top often answer your specific question without you having to click on anything. And that's even more dramatic with a service like ChatGPT or Anthropic Claude or Grok or any of the other systems that are out there. What that's doing, though, is it's actually putting real pressure on the business model of the internet. Because the business model of the internet for the last 27 years was really defined by Google and was defined by ads and then to a lesser extent subscriptions. The ads and subscriptions, like agents don't click on ads. And so as a result, if people are getting their answers without having to go to the original sources, then they're not going to be actually serving those ads. And the people who are creating that content, it's getting harder and harder for them to actually make money. To give you some sense, Google of old, for every 2 pages they would scrape, they would send you about 1 visitor. Today, it's up to about 40 pages Google scrapes for every 1 visitor that they send you. And that's the good news. In the case of ChatGPT, it's about 3,000 pages scraped for every 1 visitor they send. For Anthropic, it's over 100,000 pages scraped for every 1 visitor it sends. And that keeps getting harder and harder every single year, which means that ads-based business model is really under threat. So you have sort of 2 things happening simultaneously. The amount of traffic which is being generated online is going through the roof. And that's, someone has to pay for the bandwidth, someone has to pay for the server, someone has to pay for the compute that's behind that. And then the business model, which has been based on ads, is under pressure and threat, which means that there's less money to pay for those things. And so that, I think, is forcing a real rethink of what the business model of the internet is going to be. And I think the most interesting question, certainly in tech, maybe the most interesting question in the world, is what is the future business model of the internet going to look like? How are we going to, in the world which is increasingly going to be driven by agents, make sure that the content creators and the people who are putting those applications online are able to get paid themselves, and we're able to support the infrastructure to have what is, maybe 1,000 times more traffic online than we're seeing today? I think those are fascinating questions, and that's what we're spending a lot of time thinking about at Cloudflare.
Okay, so there's a dozen things I want to kind of unpack there. So I'm following very much of what you're talking about. It's a lot of the work that I do in the kind of space that I live in Agentic and the marketing automation capabilities that I work in for the last number of years. I want to start with the search moving to AI. So can you talk about, when you talk about scraping or crawling and kind of the foundation of how the web has been built over the last 28, 30 years, primarily by Google, can you just help our audience understand this, what I call often the give-get, the value exchange?
Yep.
Can you break that down? You just touched on it. I just want you to share that so people fully understand. When I search for a new bicycle, new camera, and I get these blue links and I see banner ads, can you break that down for us a little bit first, and then we'll go from there?
So the way that Google historically works, so that it's called the Google of 10 years ago worked, was that they would run a automated crawler, an agent effectively, that would run across the internet and would make a copy of the internet, and it would put it in an index, and then they would use that copy when someone searched for something in order to send them, to what they thought was the right place online. And so,
like a camera, for instance, right?
Yeah, buying a digital camera, you want to buy, a Nikon Coolpix camera, and so they have essentially made a copy of the entire internet. They know everybody that sells the digital cameras. They know all the review sites. They've got copies of that. They've put it in a giant database that they run. And generally, historically, for every 2 pages that Google would make a copy of, in exchange, that was the give from the site owners. They let Google make a copy of that. The get was that Google would then send one visitor back to them, and that's the average across the entire internet. If you were in the case of a regular review site, it was actually probably much more favorable than that. It might be that for every 1 page that Google copied, they might send you 10 visitors or something like that. But on average, for every 2 pages they copied, they would send you one visitor. And then what you could do with that visitor was a number of different things. You could either put an ad in front of the visitor, in which case you got paid by the advertiser to show that ad to them. You could charge the visitor for some sort of a subscription, like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal does. Or you could actually sell them something. You're selling digital cameras, like they've got traffic that's back to you to buy a digital camera, and you could be an e-commerce platform to be able to do it. Those are the financial things. On the other side, there are also some non-financial things. You think of something like Wikipedia. Wikipedia, all of the content that's created there is just done by volunteers. Nobody is making money from updating a Wikipedia article, and yet people do it. But one of the reasons people do it is for the ego of knowing that actually people are reading their stuff and doing things. And a lot of the internet was created not just for financial reasons, but for ego reasons. And so all of those things over the last 27 years that Google has existed, Google has really helped facilitate. They did things like building out AdSense in order to make it easier for anyone to put ads on their pages. They helped build subscription platforms for people to help do that. They gave people much better attribution to be able to do e-commerce more efficiently. And then even just for the pure ego, they built things like Google Analytics that let you see when people are actually visiting your site and reading your content. And so whether it was financial or just ego driven, a lot of what the internet had been before was really facilitated by Google and the ecosystem that they created.
Okay, so using your camera example, right? I put in Nikon. I want to buy a $100 camera for my 12-year-old son versus I want to buy an $8,000 professional grade camera. People all across the globe have been doing that. They get these hyperlinks and then they search. They go to the about page, they go to the product page, and they go through the process. But now I'm seeing my own behavior, and you can speak to this in detail. I might just go to Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini is a little bit different because they are part of Google, but that behavior shifts. Now I'm not maybe going to the about page and the product page. I'm just asking questions. I'm not seeing the hyperlinks. Can you walk us through what is starting to emerge?
Yeah. So I think, if you look back to when ChatGPT first emerged, people were using it kind of as a research tool to augment the search that they were doing. So they would say, I want to buy, a digital camera for my 10 or 12-year-old son, I want to spend $100. What would you recommend? And it would make some recommendations, but people tended to then go off and find things because it wasn't great at it. What's happened is the interface has stayed the same. Like the ChatGPT interface is exactly the same as it was, but the models behind it have gotten significantly better, and people are learning that, gosh, I can really trust these things. And so if you ask now ChatGPT or a Claude or even a Grok, any of these systems, like what is the best digital camera for my kid who has these requirements and then my budget, which is this, oftentimes it will just say, this is the best one. And by the way, here's the best place to buy it. And as a result, like there's a lot less of you exploring around and hunting for it. And in the process, like that means that there's not an ad that anyone has sold to you. There's not a subscription anyone has sold to you. Yeah, there might be one e-commerce company that still gets that. And that's why actually when you look at who is winning and who's losing in sort of this world of agentic commerce, for now, the e-commerce companies are the ones that are actually still seeing this drive real business to them. But the other part is that, let's imagine that someone just as a hobbyist had created a site that was out there that just reviewed every digital camera that had ever been created. And they wrote detailed reviews about it. They didn't make any money off it. They didn't have any ads. They didn't have any subscriptions for it. They just did it as a passion project because they really cared about this. What's hard is that even for that ego piece, those people aren't getting any sort of satisfaction because the crawlers are coming in from OpenAI or Anthropic or even Google now. They're taking all of the work that that person had done and they're importing it. And now that's being their work of having said, for a 10-year-old, for a $100 budget, here's the best camera. That's now getting sucked up into this super intelligence that we have. And as a result, there are fewer and fewer visitors to go back to even the original source. So even if you're just doing this for ego, the amount that you're getting back from it is much less. And we see this in some really specific ways. The number of contributions to Wikipedia is dropping because fewer people are actually reading Wikipedia. And if people aren't reading your stuff, then people don't actually want to, even if it's a volunteer job, they don't want to do it. There's not as much meaning to the work that they're doing. And so from all of these different places, I think it's putting pressure on what has been the magic of the internet, the magic of the web over the last 30 plus years. And it's going to change and require us to rethink things for what's going to happen for the next 30 years.
So this value exchange and this give-get in simple terms, I want to ask you how you define or describe two words or a publisher. How do you define a publisher in this context? And how do you define a content creator? Can you talk about that? Because I think that helps us understand what's being scraped and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I'm probably a little sloppy between those two terms because they're probably kind of interchangeable to me. Oftentimes, if I were really thinking about a publisher, I'd be thinking about somebody who's aggregated some sort of major site together. So Condé Nast obviously is a publisher, or People Inc. Those are publishers. They have multiple different brands that are behind them, and then under each of those brands, there are going to be people who are creating content: the authors, the journalists, the folks that are doing that. I think content creators could be literally anyone. The fact that you put something online, you're a content creator. Like you're obviously a content creator. I'm at some level a content creator. And we've got to just think about what are the incentives for them. Obviously, the publishers are often driven primarily, I would say, by monetary interests. So that again, ads, subscriptions, or e-commerce, like that piece. I think content creators have a much broader set of concerns. It's actually and for me, it's actually easier for me to figure out how to solve the economic interest. I think one of the things that I'm still struggling with trying to figure out is how in this world where more and more of the content which is being created is actually consumed through an AI system, how do you solve the ego piece? How do you make sure that the person who's doing that work to come up with that Wikipedia entry or that camera review site that they're just doing as a passion project, how do you make sure that they still feel like they're relevant in a world where people aren't consuming the content directly, but they're consuming effectively a derivative of it from the AI agents? And I think that's going to be, I don't have a perfect solution for that yet.
So I want to get into the actual transaction that's happened in the past 28 plus years and where you think it's going and what you built for it. Before I do that, can you give us a little sense of the scale that you guys work at, the number of transactions or requests every second, I think. Can you just talk about the scale because I think that'll help all of us understand the insights that you have gleaned over the years.
Yeah. So again, more than 20% of the internet uses us. We see every day, basically, anyone who's online will pass through our network. In any given second, we're doing over 500 million transactions, internet transactions per second. The scale is just mind-boggling in terms of what it is. If you look at the top 10,000 websites online, it's 40% plus are using Cloudflare. So almost everyone who is interacting online is passing through our network. Usually hundreds or if not thousands of times a day. And again, when we're doing our job right, we're just in the background making sure that you have a fast, secure, reliable experience as you're using any of our customers.
So taking that volume, that scale, and those insights you can glean from it, you touched on, Google scraping, and now that's changing because of AI, like ChatGPT and Anthropic, OpenAI and Anthropic and others. Can you double back onto some of that and help us understand, hey, OpenAI is now doing this, but the number of the give-get kind of conversation, that value exchange, wait a second, they're scraping content, what are they giving back? And even the numbers of Anthropic, because even in the last 6-8 months since you were at Davos, those numbers have changed dramatically, Matthew. Can you share with us what you're seeing there?
Yeah, I think the way to think about this is that what we're trying to put a metric around is how much harder has it become to be a publisher, a content creator, and still either make money from your job and what you're doing. And I think the answer is, in the case of Google, it's about 20 times harder today than it was, just a few years ago, to be able to actually make money. So if you were having to publish, let's say that you had to publish 1,000 articles in a year in order to cover your costs. Now you're going to have to publish 20,000 articles in order to cover your costs, in order to be able to get that same thing. And again, that's a radical simplification, but that's, I think, a way of thinking it. And that's with Google. With OpenAI, with Anthropic, you literally have to publish millions, or in case of Anthropic, hundreds of millions of articles in order to be able to get the traffic back to substitute for what you were doing. In all of these cases, the story is the same, which is that people aren't actually reading the original sources. They are more and more trusting the AI summary of those sources. And as they do that, less and less traffic is going back to the original source, which means that if you rely on either advertising or subscriptions, then it's much, much harder for you to actually have a viable business going forward. And we all see this. Publishers are going out of business left and right. There's consolidation in the industry as people are trying to say, how can I get more efficiency by having more content that's there in order to be able to cover what my fixed costs are? And that's just putting a lot of pressure on everything that's there. And what I worry about is, if we don't figure out what a new business model is for content creation, and this is before we even start to talk about the challenges for small businesses and other things, if we don't figure out something for that, I think we're going to see things like journalism really suffer. We're going to see things like creative storytelling get much, much, much harder. What actually gives me a lot of hope here is that the AI companies themselves actually need original content. They need humans to be out there going and doing these things. And so that's part of why, I think that there's a real hope that we may be able to figure out what a new business model for the internet looks like. And that, even though right now it feels somewhat dire, I actually think that we might be on the cusp of what could be a truly golden age of content creation, because you have a very willing buyer for new, original, interesting content in the AI companies. You have a whole bunch of journalists who have been, for the last little bit, playing a game where what they were doing was trying to generate content as inexpensively as possible, and then put articles and headlines in front of it that generated as much sort of provocation and rage as possible to get people to click on them. And no one's enjoyed that. It's not been any better. I remember sitting with a sort of a new media CEO who was bragging about how they could generate a piece of content for very little money, and then they would literally A/B test headlines to see which ones produce the largest cortisol response. Because again, if you're selling ads, that's what you want to do. And so I think we also need to be just really honest and realistic that while the business model of the last 27 years of the internet has been amazing in that it's created the internet, it's created everything that we've seen, it's also done some really bad things. It's caused us to really divide the world more. It's caused us to literally rage bait people into clicking on things, and all of those things are really challenging to making sure that you actually find what is the truth. Traffic has always been a really poor proxy for quality. Like there's a lot of things that humans stare at that aren't really good for us. Traffic accidents on the freeway, pornography, salacious violence. Like none of that is actually kind of appealing to our greater angels. And I think a lot of that is embodied by what is just how do we have more traffic, more attention, and that's the opposite of how do we create truth, how do we create beauty, and those things. So like the business model of the last 27 years of the internet is dying, full stop. But I'm kind of optimistic that this gives us an opportunity to think about what could that future look like, and how do we design a business model that actually rewards not just traffic creation, but actually knowledge creation.
Listen, you're not going to get an argument from me. I think if we had Tristan Harris or Jonathan Haidt or others on the call with us, I think they would certainly weigh in onto the good and bad of the last 20 plus years. I want to go back to Google going from 2 to 20, and Anthropic and OpenAI, the volume of scraping to returning. Is that the same for anybody? So, for instance, for Walmart, New York Times, for this Disruptor Confessions podcast, for Nikon, is it kind of across all of that kind of content that's out there? Is it neutral?
It's the average across everyone. I think that you're seeing people who are just purely sources of information are getting hurt more, and things that are easier to summarize are getting hurt more. So, long form kind of storytelling isn't getting hurt as much as digital camera reviews, because again, one is sort of facts and the other is story, and it's hard to summarize. Reading the cliff notes of a book isn't the same as reading a book, and so when people are just looking for facts, I think AI is consuming that more. Same thing is true. You see more for media companies; they're getting hit harder than e-commerce companies, at least so far. We'll see if that changes in the future, but I think right now that's the case. But the real trend, the reason the numbers keep getting worse is not because the AI companies are scraping more. The scraping is held fairly consistent. There are more AI companies, and so the overall scraping has gone up. But what's really changed is actually the consumer behavior. And the reason the consumer behavior has changed is because the models have gotten better. People are trusting them more. If you just think about your own behavior, how many times do you run a search and you don't click on anything? Right? You just read the summary that is in the Google overview. Or how many times are you going to ChatGPT or going to Claude without actually running a search at all? I think all of those things are consumers behaving. And the general trend has been that we've seen since the launch of ChatGPT, essentially every year, the more that consumers trust these systems has been doubling year over year. And that means that as you trust it more, then you don't have to go back to the original source or read that. And so again, that's just continuously putting pressure on what has been the historic business model of the internet.
Matthew, so a couple of thoughts. I want to get into Cloudflare's content and independence day. I want to talk about that. I want to actually have you define what is agentic commerce today, where is it headed?
Yeah.
So I want to talk about both of those, but I can't help but think our listeners and people watching this going, well, wait a second, if I go to ChatGPT and ask about a camera, that seems great. I don't have to scan 20 different blue hyperlinks. I don't have to look at advertising. It's going to summarize based on my budget, my needs, my whatever. The consumer, the customer seeing value in that. Can you touch on that first?
It's answer engines are better than search engines. Full stop for consumers. This is what consumers want, and it's why it's going to win. So this isn't like, I think anyone who sort of says, oh, let's try and preserve the internet of yesterday, like is sort of missing the point. Like consumers don't want to go on treasure hunts most of the time. What they want to do is get the answer as quickly as possible. And these AI systems are better at doing that than search engines are. And so over time, they're going to win, full stop. And so I think that's like it's not about, and I think anyone who's like, oh, we need to preserve, the publishers of yesterday, like No, we don't. Like what we need to do is preserve journalism, and we need to preserve knowledge creation, and we need to preserve storytelling. But whether the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times survives, those are all institutions I like and admire, and in most cases subscribe to. I'm not sure that the goal is just to say how do we make sure yesterday survives. The world is changing, and I think what we would need to say is the business model is going to change. That means there are going to be different winners and losers. But hopefully we can create a system where we're constantly seeking truth and then have incentives to publish that truth in as open a way as possible. I think those are the things that we should be, as we think about what the change looks like, we should be trying to figure out how to define the new structures that actually facilitate that. And we should learn from some of the mistakes of the last, at least 30, but really 3,000 years of being what has been largely rewarding traffic and eyeballs, as opposed to rewarding real intellectual knowledge creation and truth telling.
Just a quick break in the conversation to ask you to please subscribe to Disruptor Confessions. It's free. It just takes 5 seconds and it keeps these conversations coming. Thank you. Now back to the show. I think one of the things that I'd love to have you just define for us, what is agentic commerce today? Where do you see this going?
Yeah, I think that really, if we're realistic today, we're at the very earliest stages of agentic commerce, where agents effectively act as your helper. So they're your research assistant, they're the person who can go out and find you information. But the commerce itself is still very much being driven by humans. And so again, if we go back to the example of the digital camera, you may ask for an agent to give a recommendation of what the right digital camera is for you to buy for $100 for your kid. The agent comes back with a suggestion, and then it's up to you to then go follow it through and actually, go, visit Best Buy or Amazon or whoever it is that's selling, the camera and actually complete the transaction. I think where we're headed, though, is something that's going to be, very different, which is that you'll actually then trust the agents to actually go and conduct the business for you. So yes, you'll ask them to do something, and then you'll say, okay, yeah, now go buy it for me. And then in the extreme case that we're going to have agent to agent communications where, whole deals are going to get done without any human being in the loop at all, where information is going to get just traded back and forth. And for things that you might need regularly, that you might have your agent just automatically knowing that you're out of eggs, and then negotiating with various egg vendors that meet the specifications that you have in order to get you the best price and quality for whatever eggs you want. And I think those are the sorts of things that are coming. I think those are the things that are inevitable. But for the most part, for most consumers, right now, what they're using their agents for is the research part. The commerce is coming, in I think the not so distant future.
My own behavior, Matthew, was changing. I was kind of doing that. I was researching a new bicycle and I was just using ChatGPT or Claude to do it. I wasn't going through the hyperlinks. I wasn't going to the about page on Cannondale or Trek bicycles. I was literally using it. And when I saw it in my own behavior, I couldn't help but think, wait a second, this is not only changing my behavior, so obviously others, it's changing kind of the whole business model of what we talked about earlier, just in terms of like the give get of the internet the last 28, 30 years. But it's also putting an enormous amount of, I'll just say the word, power in these AI companies. Can you talk about that?
I think they are both powerful, but also incredibly fragile at the same time. So powerful, of course, because whoever it is that you're trusting, that agent is not only in a position of recommending things, but they're also in a position of learning about you. And as they learn about you, making better and better recommendations that are specific to you. And over time, it's sort of like the old married couple that if someone passes away, like the remaining spouse, like half of the things that have to get done around the house, they don't remember how to do anymore. The risk here is that as we lean on these agents more and more, they'll become indispensable for us. I think the fragility, though, for the AI companies is that what we're seeing is that who has the best model is changing on an almost daily basis. They are all leapfrogging each other. And then I think over time, consumers are actually going to pick for what is actually best for them. And you can imagine in a future that memory gets held by, someone else. You could imagine someone like Apple, for example, holding what is, all of the memory and knowledge of what all of your queries have been, and then providing a really elegant user interface where they completely abstract away what model is being used for behind the scenes, being able to switch all the time, and then just sharing the memory that is needed, the information that is needed, the context that's needed for the particular transaction that's being done. So if you're shopping for a digital camera, you're trying to figure out how to negotiate a raise with your boss, and you're planning a vacation with your with your spouse to celebrate your anniversary. Like, you don't, the agent that's working on planning your vacation doesn't need to know about the digital camera, and whoever figures out how to then carefully share that and then make sure that whichever model is appropriate and most efficient, most cost effective. Like, I think that's going to be an opportunity, and that actually could over time really commodify the model makers. I think the other challenge is some of the things that might seem like natural businesses are going to be very difficult for the model makers. So let's say that ads, like Google's business has been to put ads next to search, and that's made a lot of sense because it basically just enhances search. If on the other hand, I'm paying an agent, potentially, I bet the average kind of, developed world consumer will at a point, but not too far from now, be paying their agents at least hundreds of dollars a year, and in many cases, thousands of dollars a year. If I learn that agent is recommending that I buy, a Ford versus a Toyota because Ford has paid them to say that, and that there's some sort of advertising business or something that's behind it, very quickly I lose trust. And again, if these are somewhat commodities, I'm going to shift my loyalty very quickly to someone else. To give you some sense, Google for a US based user makes about $800 a year. Meta makes about $250 a year. So if all of a sudden these model companies are making, let's call it $1,200 a year for people who are spending to use their agents, like, that's a better business than potentially the kind of advertising based businesses of a Google or a Meta. And so I think very much, especially for the developed world, it might be that advertising, even within the AI platforms, doesn't end up being that viable, and that these platforms are going to compete like crazy to have consumers continue to pay whatever their subscription fee is. And then, for someone like me, I've done super well and have the resources to be able to do it. I wouldn't be surprised, if I'm spending $1 million a year on the team of agents that I have, and I'm a super valuable consumer for that. $1 million a year from a consumer is amazing. So people are going to be fighting like crazy over my business. And so I think that, yes, there's an enormous amount of power that agents are going to have. But I also think that consumers are going to have a lot of power too, especially in the developed world. I think in the developing world, the world is going to be a little bit different because they're not going to be able to afford hundreds or certainly thousands or millions of dollars a year for their agents. And you're going to see a lot more agents being influenced by different things. And if there is a huge difference between kind of the agent that you have access to if you're a kid in Sri Lanka versus the agents that I have access to, I think that's going to really divide the world maybe more than it is. And again, I think that is a problem that's coming down the pike, and we've got to really think through. And I don't have a great solution for it right now, but I think the first step is to actually acknowledge that that's something that could be a potential risk, and to think through, like, how are we going to make sure that's the case? Because that's very different. Like, the internet was amazing because the kid in Sri Lanka had all the same information as I did, and that it actually was sort of a great leveler. I worry that AI is going to be actually a great disleveler, and that might be a real problem going forward.
I'm concerned as well. You touched on the word trust, and I also think about if AI is serving me up the kind of camera or bicycle they think I need, I immediately go, wait a second, is there a relationship that I'm not aware of that's happening in the background? You talked about earlier about, like, the number of agents is like 57% of the internet are agents. They're not human beings. That's only going to grow. Is it not? Like, what does that look like?
Every prediction I've made on this has been wrong by being too conservative. So I thought it was going to be back half of 2027, and then I thought it was going to be front half of 2027. It ended up being May of 2026. So it was the first half of 26. So I was way off in that. Based on what we can see right now, in 5 years, we anticipate that agentic traffic will be 1,000 times what human traffic is online. Not because humans decline, because the agents are going to rise that much. But another way of saying that is humans are a rounding error online going forward. And so more and more of the internet is actually going to be built for agents. And that's just going to accelerate the flywheel that the interface by which we're going to consume information, the interface by which we're going to do commerce is actually going to be through our agentic interface. And then that's going to go, access a bunch of things online in order to be able to fulfill that or be able to research whatever the needs are that we have. But more and more, the internet, I think, will be built for agents, not for humans.
Matthew, one other data point I want you to share, and correct me if I'm wrong, but 10 years ago, there were how many people using the internet? And today, how many people? Can you just remind us of just the internet growth?
Yeah, I don't know specifically, but today, so there are about 8 billion people on Earth. We have been hovering around about half of people on Earth have internet access. I think we're a little bit above that now. So I think of the 8 billion, you've sort of got about 5.5 billion that have access to the internet and use it on a at least monthly basis going forward. And I think that's an incredible accomplishment. But it is still deeply troubling that you've got 2.5 billion people on Earth that are still not connected to the internet.
What's so interesting, and this is why I want to ask you about Cloudflare's made this announcement about Content Independence Day and this transaction that we've had in the past of Google kind of serving back an audience to the paying community. You have a number of AI agents going out and doing this 1,000 times the number of users on the internet. You announced Cloudflare's Content Independence Day. Help us understand why and what it is and where you're at with it today.
3 years ago, I got a phone call from one of our customers who is a large publisher. And they said, there's a new threat we need your help with. And I was like, is it the North Koreans? Is it the Russians? Is it the Iranians? And they're like, no, it's AI companies. And I rolled my eyes and was like, oh, why are publishers such Luddites? Why are they worried about this? And sort of was like, oh, guys, come on, get with the program. Like, that's the future. And they said, just go pull the data. And when we pulled the data, I was quite surprised at how much the kind of internet traffic patterns were changing and how much traffic to these sites was really dying. And again, I think that's in some levels, that is just the natural order of things where we've now got a better interface through which to consume information. So people are going to consume information through the better interface. But on the other hand, the only way that better interface is getting the information is because it's pulling that information from these publishers. And it feels deeply unfair that the AI companies are basically taking the information, at most paying for one subscription, in many cases just taking it without paying for any subscriptions, and then essentially reselling that information to their users over and over and over again. So we thought there's got to be something that we can do to help. And if you think about markets, people always talk about how markets need two things. They need supply and they need demand. Demand for sure, you need demand. Supply, although it doesn't actually fully encapsulate what you need. There is no market for air as we're sitting here because there's an infinite supply of it effectively. On the other hand, if we're scuba diving, there's a market for air because there's no air underwater. And so what you actually need is constrained supply in some way in order for a market to develop. If you have infinite supply, then no one's going to pay for it. If you have constrained supply, then people are starting to be willing to pay for it. And so what was hard was the publishers that were out there, the content creators that were out there, they didn't have any tools by which to constrain the supply of their content. And so the AI companies were just taking the content, taking it for free in most cases, and then giving nothing back because they're like, we don't need to, because we can just take it and you can't really stop us. And so what we said was that doesn't seem fair. Without us saying, like, here's exactly what the deal should be, we should at least be able to say that if you are the person who created the content, if you're the person who created the application, if you're the publisher that's there, you should be able to have the tools to decide who has access to it. That's sort of just basic property rights. And so what we did is for free, for any publisher, any content creator, we said, we'll give you the tools to be able to see who is trying to access your content, the different AI companies that are out there. And then to be able to control, to say you can't have access to my content unless you meet whatever requirement it is. The same way that, if a grocery store, sells watermelons, like they can say, listen, you can't have a watermelon for free unless you pay for it. And here's the price that I set. And every grocery store can set different prices. And if they set the price too high, then people don't buy the watermelons. And if they set it too low, then they sell all the watermelons. And they figure it out, and supply and demand end up matching. And so on July 1st of 2025, we said that in partnership with the vast majority of the world's publishers, everyone from the Associated Press to Ziff Davis and everyone in between, we said, we're going to give you the tools to be able to stop the AI companies unless they compensate you in some way for your content. And that could be, it might not be financial. It might just be give you credit for it, or it might be financially. They have to pay you in terms of some deal. And the reaction from the publishers was incredibly enthusiastic. And the reaction from the AI companies was like, listen, that's fair. Like, we get it. We're taking something from them. We should be willing to compensate it. And as long as you treat everyone the same, like, we're willing to go strike deals with it. And so over the last year, because we're a little bit over a year since we announced that, what we've seen is a substantial uptick in the amount that the AI companies are willing to do in terms of deals with publishers. We've seen a much healthier ecosystem emerge as a result of that. And I think that all started because we gave the content creators the tools to be able to actually control how their content was being accessed by these AI companies. And I think that was the first step that was necessary in order to start to figure out what is going to be the business model for publishing going forward online.
Matthew, can you give us a couple examples of how granular you can get in what I'll use the word gating, I don't know, gated content, but when you say yes or no, can you talk about, you can reveal the about page for free, but if you want some kind of white paper, you have to pay for that. Can you talk about some examples of how granular you can get with this?
Yeah, I mean, you can get as granular. The tool's pretty flexible. You can read a description of what the New York Times is, but if you want to actually access any of the articles, then that's something where it's blocked at that level. But it can get even more specific than that. You can say, for this set of AI companies that we've done special deals with, for the first week that an article is published, they have access to it, but nobody else does. For the next 3 weeks, this new set of AI companies has access because they maybe paid something, but not as much. So essentially, content has been windowed. And then maybe eventually you say, listen, we're the Associated Press, so we do want eventually everything that we do to be accessible to everyone. And so as soon as it's a month old, maybe then it's open to the world. And so I think that what's really key here is giving publishers the tools to be able to control content however they want, and then allowing a market to develop behind the scenes. The publishers say, here's a bunch of content, and we're going to window it and control how it has access. It's gone the other direction as well, where the AI companies are actually going back to the publishers and saying, you know what we actually feel like is really missing is this piece of information. And if you went out and did the sort of shoe leather work, the real journalism to get this piece of information, it'd be incredibly valuable to us. I was really inspired by this. I flew up to Stockholm to meet with Daniel Ek, who's the founder of Spotify. And, because there's no one who's compensated creators at scale like Daniel. It's really, really pretty remarkable. And you can argue about, are the right people getting paid or not getting paid, but you can't argue with the fact that because of Spotify and other companies like it, more money is going into music creation today than by an order of magnitude than at any other point in human history. And that's measured by GDP, by population, by anything. Like we're doing more with music creation. And that's quite a change. 23 years ago now, the music industry was dying. The entire music industry was worth about $8 billion. And then Steve Jobs steps on stage and says, 99 cents a song. It basically puts a price on songs. That didn't end up being the business model that won, but it laid the path to a world where you can now have for $10 or $12 a month, you can have access to an entire music catalog. And that then generates a point where I think last year, Spotify sent $12 billion, more than the entire music industry was worth, just Spotify alone. And there's Tidal and Apple Music and YouTube and TikTok and all these people that are sending music, paying music creators back. That entire business model is actually funneling more money into music creation. So it doesn't have to be that technology actually is negative for content creators. In the case of Spotify, it's actually been incredibly positive. But the story that really struck me was Daniel said, when someone comes onto Spotify and they search for like Taylor Swift, Shake It Off, hit enter, like we return results and we are sure that we have given back users exactly what they were looking for. On the other hand, if you come in and you say, I want a song about how much fun it is to dance disco with my cat, not a lot of music about that. But what we do, and as a result, we know that the results that we're giving back are not particularly good. But those bad results we actually publish back to music creators. And there are music creators around the world who are making millions of dollars a year. There's one guy in Denmark who's making over 40 million euros a year just making songs for unfulfilled Spotify queries. And I actually think that's beautiful. Like, I think that, like, if you search for something on Spotify and you don't find exactly what it is, what you're searching for is an emotion. You're searching for a story. You're searching for something that you want to kind of, be inspired by. And if it doesn't exist, but you can actually signal back to a creator that that's something that is existing, like, that's so much better than, just creating something that pisses someone off, but in exchange for a click. It's better that way. And what we're starting to see is that the AI companies are starting to say, back to real journalists, back to real academics, here are the things that we want. And if you make these things, if you do this work, then we'll actually compensate you more for it. The way that I think about it is, we've never before now had a mathematical model for all of human knowledge. And yet if you add up what all the LLMs are, that's effectively what we have. And I picture it like a giant block of Swiss cheese. Like, there's a lot of cheese, but there's a lot of holes in the cheese. The cheese is the knowledge. The holes are the places there's a lack of knowledge. And the LLMs can see where the holes are. And they can actually challenge journalists and academics and researchers to fill in the holes. And what I think is really interesting is, if that's what gets compensated for going forward, that's not chasing traffic. That's chasing actual real knowledge that moves humanity forward. And I am encouraged that post-Content Independence Day and giving publishers the tools, we're starting to see what I think is a much healthier market for the markets of journalism, academia, research that is developing. And again, I think it's early days, but I'm certainly a lot more optimistic than I was a year ago.
Matthew, one of the things that you touched on at Davos and in other conversations that I've watched is you talk about not just the Condé Nast or New York Times or Walmart. You also talk about small businesses. You talk about, I think your wife and I think you guys bought a local newspaper. So I wanted to ask you, the small businesses, right? My local hardware store, the small chain of bakeries on the west side where I live, they're not Condé Nast. They're not Walmart. How do they find their audience with this new model? Can you speak to that?
Let's be clear. Like, I actually see a really positive and optimistic financial future for media companies and even for local media. So my wife and I are the local newspaper in our small town in Park City, Utah. And, we didn't buy it because we thought it was going to be a great financial investment. We bought it because we thought that local news was really important for any community, that the only KPI that we looked at was voter turnout, which when we bought it in the town was around 23%. And through work that we did in partnership with the local radio station, we've driven it up to 63%. And I'm super proud of that. Like, that's exactly what like great media should do. What's been interesting though is, like, and this is in part because it's owned by the CEO of Cloudflare, but I think it is actually a model for the future, which is, I think we'll make more, certainly next year, maybe this year, off of licensing content to AI companies than we do off display advertising. And why is that the case? Well, it turns out that for local media, the business model that Google pioneered over the last 27 years, it's been pretty bad, and local media has really suffered. But if you're an AI company, you're trying to build a super intelligence, you need to know what's going on in Park City, Utah. Because if someone's planning a vacation, you need to know what's the best restaurant, what are the best hotels to stay at, who's in concert there, and we're the only source of that information. And so in those cases, I actually think local media is going to be much more valuable maybe than the big national publications that have really won in the past. Because if you think about it, what's the difference between the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal? This is unfair to both organizations, but let's imagine that for whatever reason, an AI company isn't able to get licensed the New York Times content. They can simply license the Wall Street Journal content and then tell the AI, now rewrite it as if you're a New York liberal, and you essentially get the New York Times. Now, that's, again, wildly unfair to those things, but I think that we've got probably too many people covering what's going on at 1500 Pennsylvania Avenue, and we probably have too few people covering what's going on at small, city council meetings, across the country at small towns. And so, and I think that the AI companies are actually willing to pay people to go and sit in those city council meetings because they're going to matter to their users, and they need to have that. So I actually think for media, we actually have a path, maybe not for all media to survive that exists today, but we have a path to what I think most people would say is for better media to survive in the future, even if it's small business, even if it's super local. And I think that's the optimistic story. But what you ask about is slightly different, which is the small business, the bodega that's down the street from you, the bakery, those things. We started out thinking about this as a media problem, but in the process of thinking about that, I started to really worry about what's going to happen to small businesses. And so if you think about it, like a new small business opens, and the question is, how do they get customers? And really the answer almost always, like a new thing opens, someone starts something new, almost always the product isn't the best that's out there. The product is oftentimes either more convenient for customers, takes less time from a customer to be able to use it, or it appeals to some emotion within the customer that they're willing to do it. You might patronize your local bakery because the baker was really, really nice to you, or you remember the smell in a way that evokes, some memory or some knowledge. You might shop at the local bodega, even though it's more expensive, but because it saves you 5 minutes from walking to the store that's down the street, which maybe has a higher quality and lower prices. What's interesting is that, again, I think that most humans make decisions on what small businesses they interact with based on either, again, convenience or emotion. Agents don't care about either of those things. Agents have almost infinite time. So the convenience bit, like they're willing to, if they have to go research a little bit more, they're going to do that. They're going to sort of ignore kind of the shortcuts that humans take. And then the emotion part, like they don't care. They're just trying to figure out what is the best solution to the problem that you have. You want a particular kind of, egg that's grown in a particular way from a particular type of chicken fed in a particular way. Like, again, that's really hard for you to find as a human with finite time, but as an agent that effectively has infinite time to be able to do that research, and then there will be lots of ways that actually gets delivered to you, then that will be the case. What worries me is if we're going to live in this world that is sort of has infinite time and is rawly kind of analytical in its analysis, I don't know how new entrants win. Because like right now, if I have an agent and they want to research Marriott hotels, there's plenty of information online of like what a Marriott is. If I open a brand new hotel, how do I actually have any reputation in order to drive that I'm a place that's trustworthy, high quality, the right thing that is there for consumers? And so over time, if it becomes harder and harder for new entrants to enter the marketplace, then what you'll see is that the established players will end up winning, and over time they'll consolidate more and more. And I was meeting with the guy who used to run, up until recently, ran PayPal, and before that, he ran Intuit Small Business. And he said, I worry that in the future, there are 5 companies. One that makes things, one that holds the money, one that holds the real estate, one that ships things, and an AI company. Now, that's not literally what's going to happen. Obviously, we won't get that much consolidation. But I do worry that left to its own devices, agentic commerce is a massive consolidator. It's going to make it harder for new entrants to be in place. It's going to take a lot of the things that we do because we're emotional and time constrained humans and make those not productive businesses anymore. And that it might be actually much harder to create a new startup, create a new business. And that obviously is worse for the world. And so, like the same way that a year ago I was really worried about media, and then I've kind of tried to figure out what the solutions are, and I kind of feel optimistic. Today, I'm really worried about small businesses, and I'm spending a lot of time with companies like Shopify, Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, American Express, Salesforce, trying to think about what does the future of making sure that we can give anyone who's out there who's trying to start a business the tools to be able to thrive and survive in a world of agentic commerce.
Well, you touched on something that's near and dear to my heart. I spent my whole career around brand, and brand is emotion. I think if you talk about brand with anybody who's been in the space, Seth Godin and others, they will talk about it in that context. And I think you're right. Agents don't care about that. Um, I want to be mindful.
I do think.
Yeah, go
So
ahead.
I do think that. I think that's one of the really interesting questions, which is what is a brand in an agentic future? It's not going to be a pretty swirls of paint, but figuring that out, like hopefully someone listening, like I want to help. I don't think we're the right company to figure it out, but I think we might be the right company to help provide some signals that go into it. Like right now, a brand is largely a shortcut for humans to understand quality and value. If there's a sign that says Mary out of a building, I kind of know what it's going to be like when I walk in there. It says Walmart, I kind of know what it's going to be like. It says McDonald's, I know what it's going to be like. Those are all different experiences, but the brands convey what the quality and value is going to be for me. And I get it. It's a shortcut for humans. Agents don't need a shortcut in the same way, but they do need to know, are you a seller of a service or a good that I can believe in and trust? And so what goes into that? I mean, there's some version of what's like Amazon star ratings. There's some version of what's your shipping policy? How many of the things that you ship out actually end up getting returned? How many chargebacks do you have? And then how can that all get wrapped up into some sort of, and again, I'm going to use a bunch of words that are kind of loaded these days, but a token that can be sort of cryptographically verified, where an agent can come along and say, aha, I can look at this very quickly and know, what's the value exchange that I'm going to get if I do business with you. Again, I don't think we're the right company to figure that out, but I would love to partner with whoever it is that is thinking about that. And I think thinking about what is a brand in the world of agentic commerce, and especially how do new entrants establish a brand that lets them compete along established players fairly? That is the billion-dollar question that if somebody figures it out, not only is going to be a great business for them, but is potentially just a really important thing to make sure that that agentic commerce doesn't become this massive consolidating force.
Yeah, and I think what is a brand in the future of AI does touch on things like sentiment analysis and affinity and net promoter score and trust factors, all of those. But I'm not sure that we can do data dashboards and analytics to the point of what we've done with brand in the past. But we'll leave it out there for others.
It's gonna be a brave new world, and again, I think like I come at it from a perspective of, I want to make sure that there's not 5 AI companies, there's 500,000.
Yeah.
I want to make sure there's not, 3 media outlets in the world, but that anyone on earth can be a content creator. And I want to make sure that we don't have 5, major conglomerates that control everything, but instead that a small business started in Sri Lanka can all of a sudden grow and be successful, and more successful because of AI than they were even because of the internet. Like that's the world that I'm playing for. I don't know exactly how to get to it, but I think most people, if you say like that's what we're playing for, and then you ask yourself, with each decision we make, are we getting closer to that or further away from it? I think that's the right framework to be thinking about how these policies should be created. Lots of AI companies, lots of media companies, lots of businesses, large and small, playing on a fair playing field, being able to service consumers so that they get better experiences, better products, better things tailored to them, and they can save time and do more with their lives. Like that's what we should all be playing for. And I think that trying to figure out then with each decision we make, are we getting closer to that or further away from it?
I just find it absolutely fascinating that an infrastructure security company by its nature has the insights and you leading a lot of this narrative. So I appreciate you bringing this kind of to the larger stage, this paper crawl, I think you've said it well. You are maybe not the best to talk about brand, but you can talk about the systems and tools that need to kind of have this transaction of the future. So I really appreciate that. Matthew, I want to go into a few quick, what I call tactical takeaways for people who might be listening or watching. Those who are hearing this and seeing this, and maybe they've been thinking about this within their own company or in their own lives, agents are coming between business owners and the customers. How should they be thinking about what should they be doing right now for themselves and for their business?
Yeah, so I think it depends like what business you're in. So I think if you're in the business of media, and the way to think of that is your business primarily dependent on either advertising or subscriptions, then the most important thing you can do right now is just take control over who has access to your content and locking down that content. And again, I think in the future, like my sort of utopian vision of the future is we get back to a place where humans get the vast majority of content online for free. Like that was amazing. Like when the internet was that was the best, right? We should try to get back to that. Agents should have to pay for it, right? And maybe they don't pay a lot. Maybe they pay a fraction of a penny anytime they access something, but they should be paying something for it because they create real costs and they don't return anything back to it. And so I think the first thing is if you're in that sort of media space, locking down your content is the most important thing. If you're in e-commerce, I think it's really complicated, and I don't quite know exactly what the right answer is. If you look at, four different major e-commerce companies, so Shopify, Walmart, Target, Amazon. Like, what's their agent? I mean, again, they're all kind of in the same business at some level. A little bit. I mean, Shopify is a little bit different than the others, but they're all kind of in the same business. Like Shopify has said, agents welcome, come on. We're going to make it as easy as possible. We're going to unify their catalog. We're going to make it super easy for them to do that. Walmart started out with a position kind of like Shopify's, but they are slowly creeping to no. We want to have more restrictions. Target is saying, agents are welcome as long as they are the ones that we have affirmatively blessed and that you access through Target.com. And then Amazon is literally suing any agentic platform that tries to access their thing. So if you're an e-commerce company and you're like, I'm not quite sure what to do, know that four of the largest e-commerce companies on earth have no idea what to do. And their strategies are all radically different from one another. And so I think over time, things are going to change. And it might be that the answer that is the right answer today is different than the right answer, 5 years from now. And so I think that's a space that that people are going to be watching, incredibly carefully. And then if you're a consumer, I mean, I think this is just an amazing time of for you. Like just the efficiency that you can get, the number of things that you can get done, the quality of the answers that you can get are so much better. And you haven't lost anything that you had before, because you can still, if you're just like, hey, I'm not sure that's right, you can still go double check it yourself by going through the footnotes and looking at things that are out there. And so for the consumer, this is an incredible time. I think what we're gonna have to figure out is how, as businesses, that we don't get all of our margins squeezed out, that we can continue to survive and thrive. And I think that the thing that gives me some optimism there is that like it's actually in the AI companies, it's actually in the consumers, it's actually in everyone's interest that there's a thriving marketplace where there are, again, lots of AI companies, lots of media companies, and lots of businesses, large and small. That's what every consumer really wants, and we should just make sure that as we design what the business model for the future of the internet is, that it pushes us forward in that direction.
I love hearing how these big four companies are trying to figure out radically different approaches. Can I ask you, you can speak at length about jobs and AI disruption for jobs, but I want to just be very specific because we have two young 20-something children who just graduated, are doing very well. But that generation, Matthew, 22-year-old, just came out of college with a degree, trying to find their place. What do you tell them? What are what I would consider durable skills? What would you tell your 22-year-old self? What would you tell a college student coming out? What skills should they build that maybe an AI agent won't take? Where do you point them to?
Yeah, so I've thought about this a lot, both in terms of Cloudflare's business, but then generally, and a couple of things. So first of all, I go back to old school business books like Peter Drucker, who would talk about inside of any company, there are really three different functions. There are people who build things, product, engineering, that kind of thing. There are people who sell things, right? All the sales team that you have. And then there are people who measure things. That a lot of finance, accounting, middle management, that their job is largely to measure things. What's interesting for me is like, yeah, AI has gotten really good at helping do engineering, but what it's really gotten good at is if I hire an engineer, like all of a sudden they're able to work and produce, 10 times the output at 10 times the quality, done correctly. And if that's the case, I'm gonna hire as many engineers as I can because I got lots of problems, and they're creating products incredibly efficiently for me. And so I think actually like builders, people who build things, I think that's a pretty durable space to be in. Sellers too, like I think we're a long way from purely agent to agent, especially if someone is doing a $1 million, $10 million, $100 million, $1 billion deal, like people are going to be involved in that. And what we're finding is that our sellers, especially assisted by AI tooling, are significantly better. They spend less time, sitting filling out reports. They spend less time building decks. They spend more time in front of customers. And I think so. I think builders and sellers are going to do incredibly well going forward. And I think that the best are going to be able to do both. So like I've challenged my sales team to say who's going to be the first salesperson who's sitting in a customer meeting and a customer asks for a feature and they build it in the meeting and release it to production while they're sitting there. That's an incredible thing. And so I think those multidisciplinary people who are both able to build and sell, like the future belongs to them. Measures I'm a little bit more worried about. One of the things that I think people don't talk about enough with AI that's a huge value from it is that it has biases, but they are uncorrelated with the rest of the organization. And so if you have a team that works together, that team is going to have a set of biases, and they tend to be very correlated because you've all gone to lunch together, you think the same way, you do things. And the hard thing is that makes things like internal audit harder because you have blind spots, and the blind spots align with the rest of the organization. AI has blind spots too, but they are uncorrelated with the rest of the organization. And so it ends up that it's really good at actually measuring things. And so things for like internal audit in our case, we do it the same way that everybody does, which is we have sort of 100 different areas of risk. We pick 6 or so every quarter. We go through them. We're now, with AI tooling, able to say we're going to evaluate all 100 areas of risk continuously over that period of time. We're finding things better. The results are better. And so that it turns out that what AI is really, 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 really good at is measuring things. And so I would caution someone who's like going to go into, I would think really hard before like finance. I would think really hard before certainly some areas of law. I think a lot of those things, you're going to see automated systems get better. In our case, though, what we really think is that kind of the opposite of what almost seems like every other company is doing. We think that it's critical to be hiring new grads and people right out of college now more than ever. Because I'm 51 years old, and I'm pretty good at AI, but I sit with like some of the interns that we have, and they show me the potential of what you can do that I would have never even thought of. And so where everyone else was cutting their internship program this year, we took ours from about 200 people last year to over 1,000 this year. And so I've actually been spending the last week just hosting intern dinners, and it's incredible to see these people. And where traditionally we thought our job was to train them, what we did differently this year is we said, listen, 50% of your summer we want you being spent being trained and learning and getting better at learning what it is to be, in a real workplace. But the other 50%, we want you to actually train us. And so we've paired junior people, these interns, with senior teams. And what's been amazing is that there's just been this incredible knowledge transfer. And there's a whole bunch more sort of just true AI native DNA, which has come into our organization. And it's worked incredibly well for us. And I think it's something that we'll continue to repeat for the years going forward.
I love it. Couple questions and we'll drop, Matthew. This has been fantastic. I just want to ask you straight out. We talked a lot about, this paper crawl and kind of the agentic commerce. How many years away from now will AI agents be doing the majority of our buying for us?
I don't know how long before they'll do the majority of the buying. My guess is it's still probably like it's going to take a while for people to really trust them enough. So but I wouldn't be surprised if I guess if you forced me to pick a number, I'd say 5 years. But I wouldn't be surprised. Sure. Yeah, but if you forced me to take the over under on that, I'd probably take the under. So,
So
so I, yeah.
we call this show Disruptor Confessions. So I always ask our guests, do you have any confession you'd like to make? Something you've been thinking about, something you've been working on, something you haven't shared but's kind of eating at you. Anything you want to share that might be considered a confession?
I mean, I think the thing that is the thing that's, I'll tell you that we're excited about but struggling with is, so you've referenced pay per crawl. What does that mean? Again, if we're in a world where agents pay for content, humans get it for free or close to that, like you've got to have a way for the agents to pay for it. And the transactions, are going to be small, fractions of pennies every time they access something, but the agents are going to have to pay for it. And again, just to support 1,000 times as much internet traffic, someone's going to have to pay for that. And so you've got to do that. I told you earlier, we handle about 500 million transactions, web transactions per second. Those aren't financial transactions. So if one fails, you just hit refresh and it's not the end of the world. Financial transactions are different. The largest financial network in the world is Visa. Visa at peak handles around 20,000 transactions per second, a little bit less than that. We think that just for Cloudflare, the day that we turn on pay-per-crawl, agentic, micropayments, that we'll have to handle about 10 million financial transactions per second. That's 3 orders of magnitude more than Visa. That's like, no one's ever built a system that can do anything like that. And by the way, that's just the starting point. We think in relatively short order, it has to scale to 100 million transactions per second. And so like, that's a wild thing. We don't have any pride of ownership. We don't need to build it ourselves, but we need to have it. And so there's a huge amount of what we're trying to figure out is, in order to empower the future, in order to build kind of the golden age of content creation, in order to do all the kind of optimistic things going forward, we have to figure out how to solve that problem. So that's confession number one. Confession number two, which we referenced also, is almost everything we've talked about so far is how we solve the financial part of all of this. But if you think about it, like, why do people create content? Yeah, some of it's like why do musicians start playing music? Yeah, some of them think someday they might get rich, but a lot of it is because of the ego and that they were going to get famous. And I think that that's the piece that I have a little bit of a blind spot around, and is super, super, super important, which is, sure, we might be able to get journalists paid for creating content that is advancing human knowledge, but how do we get them recognized for doing that? And so what I'm trying to figure out, and I think you have to do it in partnership with the AI companies, is, again, if you picture the totality of human knowledge today as a giant block of Swiss cheese, there are going to be different people who actually sort of inject more cheese into the holes and fill them in. And we can pay them for having done that. But I think we also have to remember the ego portion of it. And so I think that, in the future, something that's like I don't know if it's the Academy Awards or the Nobel Prize or whatever it is, of who has most over the last year in a bunch of different categories actually advanced human knowledge in a way that we mathematically measure, and have a big ceremony and give awards and really like celebrate these people. I think that's actually a really important piece that I actually find myself, forgetting about quite often. And I think that unless we, even if we solve the financial bit, if we don't also solve the kind of reward bit, we probably won't get the best out of humans. And so I think I hope that at some point we have sort of the giant block of Swiss cheese awards that we're handing out, and if so, again, I'd love to be involved somehow.
I love that, rewarding and recognition for quality, right? Rather than just the things that we've seen in the past. Listen, we covered so much. I really appreciate the time. You're poking at something that I think you're ahead of the curve. So keep doing it. We will follow you and Cloudflare and everything you're doing. And thank you for evolving as a company. I think what we've seen and learned from you over the years, it's been super interesting. And now this space that we're in is emerging, and boy, is it moving fast. So again, Matthew, thanks for the time.
Well, Clay Christensen, who coined the term disruptive innovation, was a business school professor of mine, and became a pretty good friend. So the minute I heard about the podcast, I had to be on.
I love it. Well, listen, for those of you watching, listening, as always, we appreciate you. Thanks for joining to the show today. And then we always ask, subscribe, follow. And as I like to say, until next time, stay curious. Thanks again, Matthew.
Thank you.